Let's go through a summary problem for activity-based costing. Be sure to pause the video and read the question. If the letters are too small to read, it is in your textbook, page 200, so be sure to pause the video, read through the question before you watch the rest of the video. When you're reading the question, you would have noticed that in that brown box, they've already calculated the activity cost allocation rates for you. They would have calculated by using the formula, which is estimated total activity cost divided by estimated total allocation base. The next paragraph is where they've given you the actual information, the actual amounts of resources used by the job. So you're going to use those to calculate your total job cost, including how much overhead to allocate. Requirement 1 wants you to calculate the total job cost as well as the average job cost per seat. So let's take a look at how we do that. You know that you're going to take into account your direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Those are the three components that go into calculating your total cost. The cost of direct materials, they told you, was $11 per seat. If the cost is $11 per seat, you're manufacturing 50,000 seats, the total cost of direct materials for your job is $550,000. For direct labor, you know that the direct labor is paid at $25 an hour. This job is going to take 10,000 labor hours, so the cost of your direct labor is $250,000. Your next stage is to allocate manufacturing overhead. Remember, we're using activity-based costing, so we're going to have to come up with three calculations, three allocations of manufacturing overhead. You're going to allocate once for machining, once for assembly, and once for packaging. Let's take a look at machining activities. What is the allocation base for machining? You allocate machining costs based on the number of machine hours. They've already told you that the activity rate is $30 per machine hour, and you're going to allocate $30 times 400 machine hours that this particular job will be using. In that data, they told you that this job will use 400 machine hours. So the amount of overhead allocated to machining is going to be $12,000. Next, let's take a look at assembling. Assembling's allocated based on the number of parts. The number of parts per car seat is 20, and we are manufacturing 50,000 car seats. So we've got to multiply 20 by 50,000 to come up with the total number of parts. And then the activity rate is 50 cents per part. So for your allocation, for assembly, you're going to allocate 50 cents times 20 times 50,000, a total cost of 500,000. Packaging is allocated based on the number of finished seats. You're going to have 50,000 seats, and the allocation rate is 90 cents per seat. So for packaging, you will have 90 cents times 50,000, a total of $45,000. So your total manufacturing overhead using activity-based costing is the 12,000 plus 500,000 plus 45,000. That will give you the total manufacturing overhead allocated to this particular job. Therefore, your total job cost is $1,357,000. They also want to know what the average cost per seat is. The average cost is $1,357,000 divided by the 50,000 seats that you manufactured, giving you $27.14 per seat. The next requirement says to calculate the bid price, assuming that the markup is 30%. To calculate the bid price, what you do is you take your cost, which is $1,357,000, multiply it by 130%, and you end up with your bid price of $1,764,100. This is using activity-based costing. The third requirement requires you to calculate the total job cost using a traditional system. They told you that if they were using the traditional system, manufacturing overhead would be allocated based on direct labor hours. So you will have to go and find out how much direct labor hours they estimate or that they will actually use for this job. You do not have to calculate a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate because they have already told you how much the predetermined overhead rate is. Again, in this particular instance, we will be doing only one allocation because that's the simple traditional system. Remember, your job cost consists of three components: direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. The direct materials do not change. The direct materials are $550,000. It doesn't matter how you allocate your manufacturing overhead, the cost of direct material is the same. Same thing with direct labor. It doesn't matter how you allocate your direct labor, the direct labor doesn't change depending on how you allocate manufacturing overhead. The only thing that changes is the cost you allocate for manufacturing overhead. In this case, we said manufacturing overhead was allocated based on direct labor hours. They said 10,000 direct labor hours will be used for this job, and they told you that the predetermined overhead rate was 65. So you will be allocating $650,000 of manufacturing overhead to this particular job. That will give you a total job cost of $1,450,000. They also want to know how much the average cost per seat is. When you're using this method, your average cost is going to be $29 per seat. You just divide the total cost by 50,000 seats that you manufacture. They also want you to calculate a bid price using the traditional system. Again, what you're going to do is you're going to say your bid price is equal to your cost times 130%, which will give you $1,885,000. So using traditional system, your bid price was $1,885,000. Remember, what this company is doing is bidding for a job. They will quote $1,885,000 if they use the traditional system to allocate manufacturing overhead. Earlier, we calculated how much they would have bid if they used activity-based costing. Using activity-based costing, they would have bid $1,764,100. Now, we said that the refined system is more accurate, so activity-based costing is more accurate. Given that, which of these is the more accurate number? It's the one that we calculated using activity-based costing. So suppose this company bid with the traditional system, they would have bid higher than their actual cost, and they could have potentially lost this job to a competitor. The traditional costing system came up with a bidding price that was $120,000 higher than the activity-based costing system.